For more, meanwhile, now on Ali's cultural impact, there's only one man I want to turn to, and that man, Dr. Todd Boyd, a Catherine and Frank Price Endowed Chair for the Study of Race and Popular Culture, also a professor at USC. We also have CBS News special correspondent James Brown joining us on the phone. Of course, JB has covered boxing extensively over the years. And JB, I want to start with you. For certainly those who knew the man, who covered not just his career, but what would come after it, today is an especially poignant day.
Poignant indeed, Josh. And first of all, thank you so very much for having me, Josh, and good to be talking with you. And clearly, the esteemed Dr. Boyd, is good to be on with him again as well. Hey, Josh, look, Muhammad Ali transcended the sport of boxing. He was a global icon. His influence was indeed that, beyond what he did in a stellar fashion in the ring, because of the man Ali, the principles that he stood steadfastly on, while reviled for that early on when he did not want to go to war during the Vietnam War. Reviled then, but respected later, even if you disagreed with him. But he was a humanitarian and one who truly had a heart, a giving heart, that he displayed not only in his community in Louisville, but anywhere around the world. I've heard too many stories that are exactly the same in that regard.
And Dr. Boyd, to JB's point, he was a man with a complicated relationship with his own hometown. Obviously, yes, that relationship is one that has come full circle. But as a product of the Jim Crow South, what was it to go on to become the man we are saying goodbye to today?
Well, you know, there's this famous story about Ali returning from the Olympics in Rome. Some people say it's not true. Some people say it's a myth. Whether true or not, the significance is important. He goes to a restaurant and is denied entrance because he's an African American at a time when the South is still legally segregated. This is a few years before the signing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, which happened under Lyndon Johnson. So here's this product of the American South, the segregated American South, Louisville, Kentucky, who goes on to become this really militant political figure. He's earlier than any other public figure in declaring he's opposed to the war in Vietnam. The rest of the country later caught up with him. And then, of course, through exile, going forward to the point that by the 90s, he becomes an American hero. It's a really amazing journey. I like to say he went from being reviled to being revered. And there's not many people we can talk about to have lived out this arc over such a significant period of time.
Certainly the Globe was looking to catch up with him. JB, it seems almost impossible considering his considerable talents, but it's almost as though we are underappreciating his skill as a fighter, certainly against the cultural backdrop in which he was rising to prominence. It was said that he confounded and bewildered boxing writers of the time so much as he impressed them. Just what sort of fighter was a young Cassius Clay and later Muhammad Ali?
You know what, and it's easy to say the greatest, but when you look at the time that he fought, heavyweight boxing was not a premier sport at that time. It certainly did. It had a dearth of attractive names that would pull people to the TV set. He borrowed, if you will, the marketing savvy of Gorgeous George, the fighter, the wrestler, yes, and used that braggadociousness, if you will, in the ring. But the key thing here is that he was able to back it up with speed, with sizzle, with power, with great feet, and with showmanship, and all of that attracted legions of folks there. And the folks that he defeated are legendary as well, too. So it certainly speaks to his greatness. And when you look at the fact that he was stripped of his title, could not fight for 3 years during his prime, yet still comes back afterwards and has a stellar career, that speaks volumes to the greatness of Muhammad Ali, if we want to look myopically at what he did in the ring. But I think it was superseded outside of the ring. And to Dr. Boyd's point, while reviled, then ultimately revered, again, while we may have ascribed the title or the word, the description as militant back then, it was a guy who certainly we all matured to understand, who stood firmly and steadfastly on his principles, which he felt to the core, so much so that he would give up those 3 years. Mm-hmm.
And as a fighter, Dr. Boyd, he used all the skills at his disposal, including a tongue, yes, that was as lacerating and sharp as any jab he ever threw. He was, I've said it with you before this week, he was hip-hop before hip-hop.
Certainly. I mean, Ali was a guy who tapped into that deep well of the black oral tradition. He rhymed, he taunted his opponents in this really entertaining way. For a black man in the early 1960s to say, I am the greatest, I don't think people understand how profound a statement this was. But as Ali himself often says, if you can back it up, it's not bragging. He would predict the round that he would knock his opponents out in. He would come up with rhymes for each particular fight. He would engage in what rappers now call beef with his opponents, giving them negative, derisive nicknames and clowning them and basically getting into their head, which of course we see at its highest point when he defeats George Foreman in 1974. So in the same way now that we associate rappers with this sort of verbal jarring and boxing, Ali was doing this for real, both inside and outside the ring. And this is what makes him such a profound, significant figure, and in many ways a sort of godfather of what would become rap and hip hop culture later.
And he also, in saying, I'm so pretty, I'm so pretty,
I'm a bad man.
Black America had not had someone with the ability, with the pulpit, with the lights so brightly shining on center stage as they had in Cassius Clay, and again he who would become Muhammad Ali. He was really one of the first to really be able to say black is beautiful.
Yes. Well, I mean, that statement, black is beautiful, would become very popular a few years after Ali had declared himself pretty, that I'm the greatest. I mean, again, you know, people might hear a rapper say something like this, celebrate themselves, and they may dismiss it. This was a profound political statement in the 1960s when Muhammad Ali says, I'm pretty, I'm beautiful, I'm not unattractive, I'm not ugly, I'm not buying into these white standards of beauty, I'm going to celebrate myself in spite of the way others may feel about me. That assertion, that self-expression, I think is what made him appeal to so many people for so long, because he was a confident man in times that were very complicated, but he rose above those times, and his own self-confidence is what propelled him forward as a boxer as well as an American cultural figure.
And we certainly saw that in the ring with the style so different from the lumbering nature of the heavyweights of his time. He danced and he danced, and then he would tell you that he was going to dance. And then, JB, as you mentioned, he sacrificed the prime, or some years of the prime of his career, to his, albeit unpopular, stances, and returned a different fighter, one who would then become, as defined by his opponents perhaps, as by his own successes, first with Joe Frazier and then later with George Foreman. What fighter did we then see when he returned for what was essentially a second career?
Which spoke to his brilliance and the incomparable skill set that he brought to the ring, that he could morph into a fighter who did not possess the same youthful skills, but exercised that awesome brain, that awesome creativity in his mind to still do well at the old expression was, as the heavyweight division goes, so goes boxing. But let me also, I don't want to leave this point coattail on what Dr. Boyd spoke to when Ali talked about being the greatest and I'm pretty. He spoke to a deep-seated need amongst African Americans globally to be justified in a very substantive way. And here was a guy, as my producer Alvin Patrick and I talked about this ad nauseum, who spoke truth to power, spoke it not for the purpose of trying to create an issue. He spoke what absolutely is a God-given right, a staple and fundamental, in religion, if you will. Although he and I were of different faiths, there was a universal truth to what he spoke, and that's why he was so revered much more globally than what he did. Boxing was the platform, the globe was his stage, and he did a remarkable job in speaking to so many people beyond just African Americans, but particularly to African Americans at a time that Dr. Boyd just spoke about what we were dealing with that was entrenched in this system.
And to your point, JB, arguably maybe the most famous fight of all, at least owing in part to the Oscar-winning documentary When We Were Kings, which is, it should be required viewing. If you have not seen it, carve a couple hours out this weekend. I can't recommend it highly enough. But we did see an aging Ali stepping into the ring against a heavily favored George Foreman, who was anything but the cuddly, grilled pitchman we see now. There was a real concern that perhaps we would see Muhammad Ali seriously injured in that ring, if not worse. And yet, one of the great parts of that documentary is, as the fight was delayed and Muhammad Ali had to remain in Kinshasa, Zaire, we saw the country and his countrymen and really the continent of Africa become one with him. The Ali Boumbaye really spoke to that global impact.
Ali fought that fight, which of course is a signature one, with fear in his heart. His camp, they were mortally concerned for him and afraid because of the unbelievable power that George Foreman brought to the stage. I mean, George Foreman trained old school. He didn't make use of all of the modern techniques of strength training and nutrition. His strength training was to take some ropes, wrap it around his torso, and pull a Volkswagen going uphill. That's what we called in the vernacular country strength, if you will, cock-strong country strength. So that got hurt. And for Ali to be against the ropes and have him say himself, it felt like he was being hit with the Empire State Building each of those times he was performing the rope-a-dope, which, by the way, as I found out from some of my martial arts teachers, his people learned from a Dr. Mong Ji, who teaches up at Ohio University, who employed the rope-a-dope many years ago. But it shows the brilliance of Ali. Look, Ali, in self-deprecating fashion, said that he was a functional illiterate. The guy was brilliant. They would have to redefine what a functional illiterate was, because it certainly wasn't Ali. And even with his sidekick, Howard Cosell, with the infamous expression saying, you know, you're awfully truculent today, and Ali would say, I don't know what truculent means, but if it's good, that's me. You know, the guy was brilliant in what he did, and you know, we may be hard-pressed to see another one. Let me defer to Dr. Boyd on this.
And Dr. Boyd, you know, we also saw, even amidst the strategy being employed in Kinshasa, the rope-a-dope, as he was taking everything that George Foreman had to give that night, still that verbal jab, as powerful as any, when he whispered into his ear in a clinch, "That all you got, George?"
Right,
and as George Foreman himself has famously said, at that point I thought to myself, yeah, that's pretty much it.
When you get to the end of that fight, I think it's round 8, when Ali, having taken all this punishment from George Foreman, decides to turn the tables on him. And there's this moment, and you mentioned the film When We Were Kings, you can see this, and now things are shifting, and he knocks George Foreman out. There's a moment when he's about to throw another punch, and he stops sort of midway through the punch, as though he didn't want to ruin the aesthetic of Foreman on the ground and his hands there in mid-punch. It's so like ballet. It's like, you know, this performance art. It transcends boxing. It's beautiful. It's triumphant. It's historically and culturally significant. He's fighting in Zaire. Mobutu Sese Seko had come up with this large amount of money to get him and George Foreman there to put Zaire on the map, you know, previously known as the Belgian Congo, Patrice Lumumba. Ali is tied to all this history. And in that moment, George Foreman, who's destroying people, he destroyed Joe Frazier. He destroyed Ken Norton. Frazier beat Ali. Norton beat Ali. Everybody thought, as you mentioned, that Ali was done, but Ali overcomes by his mind, by psyching George Foreman out. I would say that the George Foreman we know now is indebted to that moment in Ali, because when he put George Foreman down, he made this man reconsider his whole existence. So that is the true moment of Ali's triumph. And also, this is the point when he would regain the heavyweight title. This is the sort of culmination of all the political shenanigans he had been involved with, the Supreme Court, title being taken, passport being taken, and now here he is. He's triumphant. He's on top of the world. I told you so is what he said. It's like that Liston fight when he goes around and he points at all these writers and he said, I told you, I told you, I told. It's like, you know, this is the true embodiment of the man in so many ways. And I think that fight in Zaire, when he overcomes all of this adversity, he can now stand up triumphant and say that what I said before is still the same today, and I am indeed victorious.
And it still wasn't nearly the end of that brilliant arc of the singular life of the man we know today more than ever as the greatest. Dr. Boyd, You're sticking around.
Yes.
I'm riding a shotgun with you throughout the day here. Meanwhile, James Brown, JB, our esteemed colleague, we cannot thank you enough, and if we can borrow a little bit more of your time throughout the day, we will take it, but we thank you for this.
Hey, Josh, thank you very much. And the impact of Ali is enduring, from Sugar Ray Leonard, who talked about taking notes from him, knowing that braggadocious work, but to be able to back it up, to a youngster, 27-year-old reigning MVP in the NFL, Cam Newton, who also admired him as well. And whether Ali was employing psycho-cybernetics or self-fulfilling prophecies and speaking what was going to happen, the guy was brilliant. And I close with this. George Foreman is one of the finest human beings. The transformation that he's undergone, which is the word that I will use for Ali, he was and is transformational. George Foreman is one of the best human beings you will meet as well, too, and he recognizes the influence that Ali had on him as well. But thank you guys so very much. And Dr. Boyd, good talking with you again, too, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, JB. Again, George Foreman would say himself, Muhammad Ali helped to make me the man I am today. Here.